The relentless Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the loose boards of Penelope Zimmerman's small homestead as she huddled beneath threadbare blankets. The bitter cold of January 1876 seeping through every crack and crevice of the cabin she had once shared with her husband. 3 months, a widow, and the harshness of frontier life had never felt more brutal tonight. As the last embers in her hearth faded to nothing, she faced the real possibility of freezing to death before morning. Desperation drove her from her bed. She wrapped herself in every layer she owned, tucked a small revolver into her pocket, a necessary precaution for a woman alone, and stepped into the merciless night. The nearest neighbor, a reclusive cattle rancher, lived 2 miles across the rolling hills. She had never spoken more than 10 words to the man, but tonight his distant cabin, with its faint glow of lamplight, represented her only hope of survival. The journey nearly broke her. Twice she fell to her knees in snowdrifts, the brutal wind stealing her breath and resolve. But the thought of her 2 young children, sleeping at her sister's home in town until she could get herself sorted, drove her forward. They had already lost their father to typhoid. They would not lose their mother to stubborn pride and winter's cruelty. When she finally reached the cabin, her frozen knuckles could barely form a fist to knock. The sound was pathetically weak against the solid oak door, but somehow, miraculously, it opened. The man who stood before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his features half hidden in shadow. "Madam." His voice carried both surprise and concern. "I apologize for the intrusion," Penelope managed through chattering teeth. "My fire has died, and before she could finish, he stepped aside. Come in before you freeze solid." The warmth from his fireplace hit her like a physical force, bringing tears to her eyes. "Thank you, mister." She stumbled toward the heat, her limbs painfully numb. "Anderson Keller," he replied, quickly closing the door against the howling wind. "But folks just call me Andy." As the warmth gradually returned, feeling to her extremities, Penelope took in her surroundings. The cabin was surprisingly neat for a bachelor rancher, simple furnishings but clean and orderly. Andy moved with efficient grace, stoking the fire higher and setting a kettle to boil. "Mrs. Zimmerman, correct?" he asked, pulling a chair closer to the fire for her. Surprised, she nodded. "Penelope Zimmerman, I didn't realize we'd been introduced." A shadow passed over his face. "We haven't. I was at your husband's funeral. The whole county turned out. He was well respected." "Yes, he was," she whispered, the grief still raw. "Thank you for remembering." Andy handed her a steaming mug of coffee laced with something stronger. "Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside." The whiskey-spiked coffee burned a path down her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, the crackling fire and howling wind the only sounds. "You shouldn't be out there alone," Andy finally said, his voice gentle but firm. "That homestead is too isolated for a woman by herself." Pride stiffened her spine. "I'm managing fine." His eyebrow lifted. "Is that why you're in my cabin at midnight, half frozen?" The blunt assessment stung, but she couldn't argue with the truth of it. "It's just temporary, until spring when I can sell the property." Andy considered her for a long moment. "Where are your children tonight?" "With my sister in town. Martha insisted they stay with her until she faltered. "Until I determine what's to become of us." Andy nodded, his expression unreadable. "You have options, Mrs. Zimmerman, don't forget that." She wasn't sure what he meant, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her now that she was warm. Andy seemed to notice as he rose and disappeared into the cabin's second room, returning with a blanket and pillow. "Take my bed," he offered. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "No arguments. You need proper rest." Too tired to protest further, Penelope allowed herself to be guided to his room. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the sheets smelling of soap and open air. As sleep claimed her, her last thought was that Anderson Keller was nothing like she had imagined the solitary rancher to be. Morning brought clarity and embarrassment. Penelope woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. When memory returned, mortification followed swiftly. She had imposed on a stranger, a single man, spending the night in his home. The potential for scandal was enormous. She emerged from the bedroom to find Andy already dressed for the day, his sleeves rolled up as he prepared a hearty breakfast. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice neutral. "Weather's cleared some. I'll take you home after you've eaten." "Mr. Keller, I cannot thank you enough for your kindness, but I'm concerned about appearances. Nobody saw you come, nobody will see you leave," he interrupted pragmatically. "Your reputation is safe with me, Mrs. Zimmerman." Something in his steady gaze made her believe him implicitly. They ate breakfast quickly, and true to his word, Andy hitched his horse to a small sleigh and drove her back to her homestead in the bright morning light. At her door, he hesitated. "I'll bring wood by later today, enough to last you a few days." "That's not necessary, it is," he said simply. "We're neighbors, it's what neighbors do." Before she could argue further, he was gone, the sleigh cutting a path through the fresh snow. True to his word, Andy returned that afternoon with a wagon load of split firewood. He stacked it neatly by her door, filled her indoor wood box, and made sure her fire was burning strongly before he left. "I can pay you," Penelope offered, uncomfortable with charity. Andy shook his head. "Not looking for payment, but I would accept a meal sometime if you're offering." The invitation surprised her. Of course, perhaps this Sunday after church. A strange expression crossed his face. "I don't attend services, Mrs. Zimmerman, but I could come by after." She nodded, curious about his avoidance of church but too polite to pry. "Sunday afternoon, then." That Sunday began a pattern. Andy would appear at her door precisely at 2 o'clock, always with some small gift: fresh venison, a sack of flour from town, once even a colorful hair ribbon that made her blush like a schoolgirl. They would share a meal, and he would handle whatever heavy chores needed doing around her property before departing as dusk fell. By February, Penelope found herself watching the clock on Sundays, her heart beating faster as 2 o'clock approached. Their conversations had gradually deepened from polite small talk to genuine sharing. She learned he had come west after the war, having served with the Union Army. He spoke little of those days, but the shadows in his eyes told her enough. He had purchased his land 6 years ago and built his cattle business from nothing. In turn, she told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Richard Zimmerman when he came to teach at the local school, and their decision to seek opportunity in the expanding Western territories. Their children, Emma, 8, and James, 6, were the light of her life, she explained, showing him the daguerreotype she kept close to her heart. "They have your eyes," Andy observed quietly. "When will they return home?" Penelope sighed. "Martha believes I should sell and move to town. She says a widow has no business trying to run a homestead alone." "And what do you believe?" The question caught her off guard. No one, not even her sister, had asked what she wanted. "I believe this land was our dream, Richard's and mine. Abandoning it feels like abandoning him all over again." Andy nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Then don't abandon it, but perhaps accept help when it's offered." In early March, Penelope finally brought the children home. Martha had protested vehemently, but Penelope stood firm. This was their home, their legacy, and she would find a way to make it work. Emma and James were initially shy around Andy when he came for his Sunday visit, but his gentle manner and genuine interest in their chatter soon won them over. By his third visit, James was following him like a shadow, absorbing every bit of knowledge Andy shared about horses and cattle. Emma, more reserved like her mother, watched with cautious curiosity as the tall rancher fixed their broken porch step and showed them how to set humane traps for the rabbits that raided their vegetable garden. "Mr. Keller is nice," Emma commented one night as Penelope tucked her into bed. "Is he going to be our new papa?" The innocent question struck Penelope like a physical blow. "No, sweetheart, Mr. Keller is our neighbor and friend, that's all." But that night, as she lay alone in her bed, Penelope confronted the feelings she had been trying to ignore. Andy's visits had become the highlight of her week. His steady presence, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness all had begun to breach the walls of grief around her heart. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. What would Richard think? The question haunted her. They had loved each other deeply, built a life together, created children together. Was it disloyal to feel this stirring of affection for another man's spring's arrival brought new challenges? The planting needed to be done, but Penelope had never handled this task alone. Richard had always managed the fields while she tended the household and garden. Now, faced with acres that needed seeding, she felt overwhelmed. Andy arrived one Sunday to find her sitting on her porch, papers spread around her, clearly distressed. "What's troubling you?" he asked, settling beside her. "I'm trying to plan the planting, but there's so much I don't know." Richard always. Her voice trailed off. Andy studied the crude diagram she had drawn. "You're overthinking it. The soil here is good for wheat and corn, and you don't need to plant all of it. Start small enough to feed your family and maybe sell a little in town." His practical advice calmed her panic. "Would you show me?" Just to start, the following day, Andy returned with his own plow and 2 strong horses. For a week, he worked alongside Penelope from dawn until dusk, showing her how to prepare the soil, how deep to plant the seeds, how to irrigate from the creek that ran along the eastern edge of her property. The children helped too, James proudly carrying water and Emma carefully dropping seeds into the furrows. As they worked, Penelope found herself watching Andy the way sunlight caught in his sandy brown hair, the strength in his hands as they guided the plow, the patience in his voice as he explained each step to her curious children. Something was changing between them, something neither had acknowledged but both felt growing stronger with each passing day. The evening before Andy was to return to his own neglected ranch, they sat on her porch, exhausted but satisfied with their work. The children had been put to bed and a peaceful quiet settled over the homestead. "I can never repay you for all this," Penelope said softly. Andy's eyes met hers in the fading light. "I'm not looking to be repaid." "Then why?" The question had burned in her mind for months. "Why help a widow and her children? Why spend your precious time on our problems?" For a long moment he was silent, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Because I know what it is to be alone," he finally said. "To face each day wondering if anyone would notice or care if you didn't make it to the next." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep inside her. "I would notice," she whispered. "I would care very much." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to change, charged with unspoken feelings. Andy's hand moved slowly across the space between them, his fingers lightly touching hers. The contact, simple as it was, sent warmth spreading through her body. "Penelope," he said, her name sounding different in his voice, "I should go." She knew he was right, propriety demanded it. But something stronger than propriety held her in place. "Stay a little longer." He did, and they talked until the stars filled the night sky, their hands remaining connected, a bridge between 2 solitary souls. The spring planting gave way to summer's growth. Andy's visits became more frequent, no longer just on Sundays, but whenever his own work allowed. He brought tools to fix her leaking roof, showed James how to mend fences, and once surprised Emma with a kitten from his barn cat's latest litter. To Penelope, these months felt like a rebirth. The crushing grief that had defined her winter was gradually being replaced by something new, not erasing Richard's memory, but allowing space for joy to exist alongside it. The homestead that had once felt like a burden now hummed with possibility. In town, however, tongues began to wag. The widow Zimmerman and the bachelor Keller were the subject of whispered conversations and knowing glances. Martha confronted her sister after church one Sunday in July. "People are talking, Penny," she hissed as they walked along the dusty Main Street. "A respectable widow doesn't entertain a single man so frequently." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Andy is helping me with the homestead. There's nothing improper, it's not just the helping," Martha interrupted. "It's the way he looks at you, the way you look at him." Do you think people don't notice? The accusation struck home because Penelope knew there was truth in it. The feelings growing between her and Andy were becoming harder to disguise and harder to deny to herself. Richard has been gone less than a year, Martha continued, her voice softening slightly. Think of how this appears to his friends, to your children. The mention of her children stung. Emma and James adore Andy. He's been nothing but kind and respectful to them and to Richard's memory. Martha sighed. Just be careful, Penny. The frontier is unforgiving of women who don't observe the proprieties. The warning followed Penelope home, casting a shadow over her thoughts. When Andy arrived the following week, she was uncharacteristically reserved, keeping herself busy with chores that prevented lengthy conversation. Andy noticed, of course. As evening approached and the children went inside to prepare for bed, he caught her arm gently as she moved to follow them. "Have I offended you somehow?" he asked, concern evident in his expression. "No, of course not." She couldn't meet his eyes. "Then what's changed?" Penelope hesitated, torn between honesty and propriety. "People in town are talking about us, about your frequent visits here." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, and that troubles you?" "It shouldn't," she admitted. "I know there's been nothing improper, but for my children's sake, for their standing in the community." Andy released her arm and stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. "Say no more." "I understand completely. I wouldn't want to damage your reputation or the children's." "Andy, I didn't mean—" "It's all right, Penelope. Truly." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll keep my distance for a while, give the gossips something else to chatter about." True to his word, Andy stopped coming to the homestead. August arrived with scorching heat and no rain, the crops withering in the fields despite Penelope's best efforts. Emma fell ill with a summer fever that left her weak and listless. James grew quiet and sullen, spending hours watching the road that led to Andy's ranch. "When is Mr. Keller coming back?" he asked repeatedly. "He's busy with his own ranch," Penelope would answer, the lie bitter on her tongue. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching storm clouds gather on the horizon and praying for rain, James climbed into her lap, something he hadn't done in months, claiming he was too big for babying. "Mama," he said solemnly, "did Mr. Keller go away because of me?" Startled, Penelope hugged him close. "No, sweetheart, why would you think that?" "Because I heard you telling Aunt Martha that you were worried about me and Emma, and then Mr. Keller stopped coming." His small face was creased with worry. "I miss him." The simple confession broke something inside her. "I miss him too," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Then why can't he come back? Why indeed?" The question echoed in her mind through a restless night. By morning, she had made her decision. After settling the children with chores, she saddled her horse, something Andy had taught her to do, and rode toward his ranch. She found him mending a fence line, his shirt dark with sweat under the August sun. He straightened as she approached, surprise and something else, hope perhaps, flashing across his features. "Penelope, is everything all right?" The children miss you," she interrupted, dismounting. "I miss you." He stood very still. "What about the town gossips? Let them talk." She took a step closer. "I've realized something, Andy. Life is too short and too precious to let other people's opinions dictate our happiness. Richard taught me that, though I seem to have forgotten it for a while." Andy's expression softened. "And what would make you happy, Penelope?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. She took another step toward him, close enough now to see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "You," she said simply, "your presence in our lives, your kindness to my children, your—" She faltered, then gathered her courage. "Your company in my days, and perhaps someday in my nights as well." Color rose in Andy's face, but he didn't back away. Instead, he reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. "I've been half in love with you since you knocked on my door that winter night," he admitted hoarsely. "But I never dared hope you might feel the same." The first touch of his lips against hers was tentative, a question more than a demand. Penelope answered by stepping into his embrace, her arms encircling his waist as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, wonder reflected in their eyes. "Come back with me," she whispered. "Have dinner with us tonight. Let's begin again, properly this time." Andy nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'd like that very much." The storm that had threatened for days finally broke that evening, bringing blessed rain to the parched land. As thunder rolled across the plains, Penelope, Andy, and the children sat around the table playing checkers, their laughter a counterpoint to the storm's fury. Later, after the children were asleep, Penelope and Andy stood on the porch watching the rain, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "I don't want to rush you," he said quietly. "I know you're still healing." Penelope considered his words. "Grief isn't something that simply ends," she replied. "It changes shape, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. Richard will always be part of me, part of our children, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for new love." Andy tightened his embrace. "I would never ask you to forget him. I know." She turned in his arms to face him. "That's one of the reasons I've fallen in love with you." The words, once spoken, seemed to free something inside her. Andy's eyes widened, then crinkled with joy as he bent to kiss her again, this time with no hesitation. September brought the harvest, meager though it was after the drought. October painted the hills in gold and crimson. November brought the first dusting of snow and a proposal, offered simply one evening as they sat by the fire. "Marry me," Andy said, taking her hand. "Let me be a father to Emma and James. Let me share your burdens and your joys." Penelope didn't hesitate. "Yes." They were married 2 weeks before Christmas in the small church in town, Emma serving as her mother's attendant and James proudly standing beside Andy. Martha, eventually won over by Andy's evident devotion to her sister and niece and nephew, smiled through happy tears. That night, after the children had fallen asleep in their new bedroom at Andy's larger ranch house, now their family home, Penelope stood by the window watching snow begin to fall. "What are you thinking?" Andy asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "I was thinking about that night last January," she replied. "How close I came to not knocking on your door, how easily we might never have found each other." Andy turned her in his arms. "But you did knock, and I opened the door. You gave me fire when I was cold," she whispered. "And now you've given me your name. And my heart," he added, kissing her softly, "always my heart." As the snow fell silently outside, Penelope Keller surrendered to the embrace of her new husband, her new life, her new beginning. The path that had led her through darkness had finally emerged into light, a light kindled that desperate midnight when a widow knocked on a cowboy's door. Spring came again to Wyoming, the land renewing itself as it had for countless generations. On the Keller Ranch, new life flourished, calves in the pastures, crops in the fields, and at the center of it all, a family bound not by obligation or circumstance, but by love freely given and joyfully received. Penelope watched from the porch as Andy taught James to rope a fence post, the boys' laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Beside her, Emma sat reading aloud to her new baby brother, Thomas Richard Keller, born as the first wildflowers bloomed. Life would never be perfect. There would be droughts and blizzards, setbacks and challenges, but Penelope no longer feared facing them alone. From the ashes of loss had risen something beautiful and enduring, proof that even in the wild harshness of frontier life, love could take root and flourish. And it had all begun with a desperate knock at midnight, when a cowboy opened his door and his heart, giving a widow fire when she was cold and, eventually, his name when she was ready to love again.